Hi, everyone. Today, I just want to show you a little bit about how to adjust spacing within your typography. So we're going to talk about kerning, tracking, and leading. And in my demo here, I'm using sort of a poster-sized document that's going to be similar to the project we're working on this week. So first off, I've created a document that is 12 by 18, so 12 inches wide by 18 inches tall. I can see that here in the document properties on the properties tab, my width and my height. It's also not a facing pages document, so we're working with just a single sheet. I've also done a little bit of other prep work before I got started. I did create a grid. This grid of guides is created by going to Layout, Create Guides. And here I added rows and columns, each one with a gutter, so that I could create a grid of basically 2-inch squares. Number of rows was 9. So dividing my 18 into 9 spaces and taking the 12 inches of width and dividing it into 6. That's just going to give me sort of some underlying structure to work with as I do my layout. I also have on the left-hand side here all of the type that I need to include. Now, when I include typography in a sort of free-form layout like this, I am not going to create one text box that includes everything. I want to break this up into some components that I can move around independently and style independently and really like fine-tune their placement as individual objects separate from each other. So I'm going to create a new text box. And we'll just start here. I'm going to stick to my grid roughly as a starting point. Let's do, I don't need to go to 1 square, but I'm going to use a big chunk of squares here. So 3 wide by 4 tall. And let's see, I'm going to take the title. So I'm just highlighting the title from my text here. I'll come back to my new text box and I'll place it in there. I just copied and paste. Command C for copy, Command V to paste. Now with my type tool, I'm going to highlight that type I've just placed. And I want to come over to my character settings. This is going to be, right now I can see that in my properties tab, I have character. It's telling me all of the options for this particular character. Remember that if you're not seeing everything, click on the 3 little dots to get the sort of fly out options, the extra options. That'll pop that character palette into, like, expand it to show all your options for that text. And first, I'm going to just pop the size of this way up, even bigger. There we go. We'll adjust the line wrap and everything a little later. I just want to get it big enough so that I can really see the font and start to think about how I might, like what font I want to use. Remember that the font you choose really says a lot about, or conveys a lot about the character of the, or the feeling of the item that you're trying to, in this case, promote. So nice thing in InDesign is that as I look down my list, I actually see some, like little preview of what the font is going to look like. It even fills it in with the type that I have selected. So in this menu that's popping up and showing me my font choices, I'm seeing, in this case, a Midsummer Nights, and I can see it here. And then it's also going to preview on my screen. Choose your fonts carefully, right? This looks like a very traditional, old school black letter font that might seem like it's appropriate for a Shakespearean play. But of course, only if that Shakespearean play is really traditional. If that Shakespearean play is going to be something different, a little more modern, I might want to choose something different for that font. Okay. Remember that when you're choosing a font, you're choosing sort of a font family that you're going to work with on your layout. So I've chosen a Bodoni. I also have some other styles of that particular font. There are fonts within the font family. So I could change this to a bold if I really want to see sort of a dramatic, thick vertical line in those letters. Okay. And I'm just going to decrease the size of my font a little bit because I'd really like Midsummer to fall on one line. See if we can make that happen. Too small. Let's go 40. I'm going to increase my text box. All right, this is where the playing around happens. Just bumping this down a couple points at a time. So. Okay, now spacing. Kerning is the space between the letters. In order to apply kerning in InDesign, we are going to select the specific space that we want to alter. And what we're looking for is ways to like we want to like smooth, even spacing. So I'm going to look at all of these spaces and see if there are any places where I feel like there is too much or too little space. Now, right off the bat, one jumps out at me, and that's going to be where the apostrophe is. This is often the case that apostrophes sort of add more space than you really want. That S is sort of floating by itself, a little lonely out there. So I'm going to take my cursor with the type tool and click between the apostrophe and the S. Okay. On my character palette on the right, I'm going to look for the icon that kind of looks like two letters with a cursor between it. It's like V/A. When you roll over it, you're going to see a little tooltip that tells you kerning. And I usually am just going to use the up and down arrow to adjust this. It's moving by tens. As I'm bringing it together, I'm getting a negative number. Okay. You can also go in there and type. So if the jump in by tens is too much, split the difference. Type in a number in between and find that perfect, comfortable space. You can also use kerning to create what are called ligatures in type. So ligatures are when two letters are connected. This is usually sort of just a style choice. Let's say I really want these two M's to appear to connect. I can put my cursor between them and bring them together to the point where they actually touch. Okay. Keep in mind, beyond defining a style with our type, we are also trying to make this legible. So part of it is about a flow, a beautiful sort of rhythm, but also readability. Okay, the second typesetting that I want to talk about is tracking. And sometimes people get kerning and tracking confused. Kerning is the space between just two letters. Tracking is the overall density of all the letters selected. So in order to apply tracking, I need to select the type that I want to adjust, and I want to select all of the letters that I'm going to change the space between. So for example, I'm going to go get my next piece of type. Let's see, by William Shakespeare. Maybe we'll just take William Shakespeare. You don't necessarily need the byline. And I'm going to create a new text box. I want to be able to manipulate this sort of independently. So I've created a new text box, which I'm going to move in here. Just to clean this up, I'm going to shrink the previous text box to fit the grid there. Okay, so I have William Shakespeare here. Let's give this the same font, right? Like I'm working with Bodoni. So I'm going to go find Bodoni. You can type in the beginning few letters of the name of a font and it will limit your list to just the fonts that start with those letters. So maybe italic. Bump this up to about 48. Let's see what we've got. Okay. So it's possible I bumped this up to a size that seems appropriate in relation to the headline, right? I'm thinking about the hierarchy and the way that I want the components to be read, the order I want them to be read in. So this feels like about the right size, but it also looks a little tight and a little difficult to read. So I might highlight that, come over to my character palette and adjust the spacing in between those letters, right? I'm going to, in this case, add a little bit of spacing. I'll start with 10, maybe 25. I don't really want it to come out beyond the word dream, so I don't want to go too far. But that little extra bit of space between the letters is making William Shakespeare much easier to read. So that's tracking. Now leading is our third type of spacing that we can adjust within the character palette. And leading is the space between the lines. It is a vertical space. In this case, I'm going to take some of this contact information. This is really what I would consider like third tier information in my layout. I'm going to place it in its own text box at the bottom. If I do select all while I'm in the text box, I will select all the content of that box. And again, I'm going to go find a Bodoni that's appropriate here. Probably a Bodoni book. I might want to make this font a little bit bigger. This is a poster after all. It's not a book or something I'm going to be holding in my hand. But keep in mind, this is my tertiary information. This is third level of the hierarchy. So I don't want it to get too big. Maybe 18 points. But what I notice when I do that is that this really decorative font, in fact, it might be too decorative at this scale, is it's a little hard to read. I'm going to eliminate what I can. Remember that the cleaner it is, the less information, the less characters you have, the easier it will be to read at a glance, to scan. So I'm going to get rid of the HTTP. I don't need it. And I'm going to get rid of this extra slash at the end of the web address. To think carefully about like, how do I want, like, what do I want the phone number to look like? Are periods best? Are dashes best? There's a lot of options in terms of the way people handle phone numbers now. Could just do a double space in there. I think I liked the periods best. So let's go back to that. Right, some of this is trial and error. But still, this is a little, it's like dense and there's a lot of curly cues in there. So to make this more readable, I am going to add space between these lines. Sort of like I've done everything else I can with this particular font. If I come over to my character palette, Next to my font size, on the right-hand side, I have this A over another A. That's my leading. I should point out that the auto is going to be there in parentheses. It gives you an idea of sort of like where to start. It's usually just a little bit bigger than your font size. If I bump it up to 24, I get just a little bit more space, and I can go, point by point using the up and down arrows to find just the right amount of space. Right. And that's the beginning of my layout. I can preview it without anything else there. This is just the text, right? But I'm starting to get a sense of the hierarchy, the style of my font, and adjusting the spacing so everything's really flows together and is very readable.